Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I am very excited about today's video because we are going to be ranking my top 10 foundations. Now I know that foundations right now seem to be the hot item to release. There are so many foundations on the market right now, and I've been intrigued by a lot of them. But foundation, for me personally, it's not like eyeshadow palettes. It's not the product that I get the most excited to try out. I know that a lot of you feel differently about that. That's absolutely fine. But for me, I like to try and put my foundations to good use, actually use them up. And unless they're ones that are absolute misses for me, I will usually try and find a way to make them work. I do have dry skin. It does lean a little bit more normal in the summer months, but in the winter, I have very, very dry skin. And for me personally, I typically prefer foundations that are a little bit more hydrating, that are not overly heavy, and that's usually kind of a solid medium coverage. So that's just something to keep in mind. So again, I'm going to share with you guys the top 10 foundations in my collection. None of these foundations are brand new. I know all of these foundations very well. Some of them I have been repurchasing for years. So we're going to go through my top 10 foundations. Starting with number 10, I'm going to talk to you guys about what it is I like about each foundation, and maybe some of the things I don't like as much about each of them. So I hope that you guys are excited about this one. If you are newer to my channel, I want to say welcome. I hope that you'll consider subscribing. Stick around, hit that notification bell just so that you know every time I upload a new video. And let's get into foundation number 10. So for number 10, I went with the Maybelline Superstay foundation. This is a full coverage foundation. This is from the drugstore. This one retails for, I want to say, around $10. I didn't actually look up the price of this one specifically, but this one has a natural, leaning more of a matte finish. So that's one of the things that I don't love the very most about this one. And this is a foundation that I don't actually like on its own, but it is a foundation that I reach for very often to mix in with other foundations. This is a very long wearing foundation. So if you are someone that loves a good long wear, and maybe if you have oilier, more normal to oily skin, I think this might be a very good fit for you. If you do like full coverage, it is definitely full coverage. It also has a really good color range. I love Maybelline's color range. I think for a drugstore foundation, they have a really good solid color range. In addition to shades, they have a really good range of undertones. The one that I have right here is in the shade 128 Warm Nude. Now, the reason I don't love using this foundation on its own is I find it to be a little bit heavy for my particular skin type, for my taste. I also think it's a little bit difficult to blend on my dry skin. That might just be because my skin is dry, and I just think it's a little bit higher coverage than I typically like. Don't get me wrong, I like a good medium to full coverage, but this is pretty intense full coverage. But with that said, again, this is probably one of my most reached for mixing foundations, and that is something I probably already should have mentioned. I mix my foundations together quite often, and this is when I definitely like to pair with more hydrating foundations to give them a little bit more wear time. For my 9th pick, I went with the Catrice HD Liquid Coverage Foundation. This is a really great foundation. I have mine in the shade 010. This is a little bit too light for me. I am actually wearing this one mixed with my number 1 foundation, which we will get to in a little bit. But this one retails for about $10. You can find this at Ulta. It is a full coverage foundation, and it has a satin, very skin-like finish. It's quite long wearing, and it also has almost a slightly blurring effect. But I do find if I go in a little bit too heavy-handed with this and really get a good full coverage out of it, it can look a little bit heavy, so I have to be very careful with how I apply this one. This is a foundation that I love wearing on camera. It looks so good on camera, but it's one of the foundations that if I am right up close to someone's face, I'm a little self-conscious about this one because I know that it can look a little heavy and makeup-y on me personally up close. Another downside to this one is the color range, especially if you buy this in store. I believe when I picked this up at my Ulta, I've had this for I think about a year now, but when I picked mine up, I think they only had 2 or 3 shades in store, and they both looked about this light. They do have a few more shades available online, but I am not someone that likes to buy foundation online. I always like buying it in the store. Quick note about packaging. Let's rewind a little bit. I forgot to mention that the Superstay does come with a pump, which is great. This Catrice foundation does come with a dropper. I personally really like the dropper foundations. I think next to a pump, this is probably my second most preferred foundation packaging application method. The glass bottle is really nice. I think for the price, it's a really great foundation, especially if you're someone that really likes a good satin finish and a good full coverage. I don't like applying this one with my fingers. I definitely think it works best with either a brush or a sponge. But I do think this is a great foundation. I do think it's a little bit easier to work with than the Maybelline Superstay. It's a little bit more user-friendly. It's a little bit easier to blend out. If you can find your color match, I think this is probably one a lot of you would like. Moving on to my number 8 foundation, and it is the Maybelline Fit Me foundations. I wanted to mention these ones together. We have the Matte and Poreless and the Dew In Smooth. These are very different foundations, the finishes of these, but I wanted to mention them together because when I do wear these foundations, I like to combine them together. And this is by far one of my most affordable foundations in my collection. I do like both of these on their own. They are quite different. I do think the Matte and Poreless is, like it says, a little bit more of a matte. I would say it's more of a satin matte finish. It is a little bit more long wearing as well. The Dewy and Smooth, I love the finish of this one, but it is not long wearing at all. I think this one probably only wears on me about 3 or 4 hours before it basically just kind of disappears from my skin. This one I do think has more of a solid medium coverage, whereas the Dewy and Smooth has more of a light to medium coverage. Probably one of the biggest drawbacks with these foundations are the packaging. They do come in just the kind of pour packaging, which is not my favorite packaging method, but again, if it's going to save me $5, I'm okay with that. But you can find this at the drugstore for around $5, which is such a fantastic bargain. If you're someone that's on a budget, if you are wanting to try out your very first foundation, this is one I would recommend because it's affordable. They have a great color range as well. They have a lot of different shades and undertones to pick from. It's also really easy to find. You can find this at pretty much any drugstore. I remember several years back, people talked about, especially the Matte and Poreless, quite a bit. I haven't heard people talk about it recently. I know this one's been around for a while, but I still think it's a really great foundation from the drugstore, especially if you are on a budget. So coming in at number 7 is this one right here. This is the Makeup Forever Ultra HD foundation. This is their Invisible Cover foundation. This is $43, so this is my most expensive foundation that I'm going to be mentioning today, but it's a great foundation. It's solid medium coverage. I love that you can pick this up in Sephora because you can actually shade match yourself or have them help you get a perfect shade match, which is very difficult to do with drugstore foundations. But I love how lightweight this is. It does feel almost invisible on my skin. It's super lightweight, but it does give you a very solid medium coverage. You can build it up if you want to in certain spots. It's just a really great foundation. I would say this one has a natural finish, leaning a little bit more hydrating. I wouldn't call it dewy, but I wouldn't call it very satin either. It's kind of just a step above just that kind of satin natural finish. This wears really well on my skin. I find it lasts pretty much all day long. It doesn't break apart on me. It's super easy to apply and blend. This applies beautifully with a sponge, with a brush, or with my fingers. And the packaging is absolutely lovely. It's a nice pump, but it's actually a plastic bottle, which I kind of appreciate that because it's a little bit more light. It's not quite as heavy and fragile. Sometimes I worry about these foundations. This is kind of just my personal situation, but I film in my basement on a slab cement floor. I do have a rug underneath me, but there are areas where cement floor is showing, and I'm always terrified that one of these glass bottles is going to fall off of my makeup desk and shatter all over the floor. So I kind of like that this one comes in just good, sturdy, solid plastic packaging. The only downside with this one is the price. $43 is a little more than I personally like to spend on a foundation, but if you don't mind spending a little more on a high-end foundation, if those claims sound appealing to you, I definitely would give this one a try. For my number 6 foundation, I decided to go with the Sephora 10-Hour Wear Perfection Foundation. I picked this up last fall, I believe, during the Sephora VIB sale, and I really love this foundation. This one is a more medium to full coverage. It retails for $20 at Sephora. They have a very large shade range. I love this one because it does have very good wear time. It says 10-hour wear, but this wears as good as some of my ones that claim to have 12 or 24-hour wear. It's just in general a good long wearing foundation, but I find this one really easy to blend. Even though this one does have more of a satin finish, it blends really easily into my skin. It doesn't look heavy on my skin. And this is another one that I really love mixing in with foundations to give them a little bit better wear time. The packaging on this one is a glass bottle with a pump, very nice packaging, very easy to work with. I find this works well with my fingers, with a sponge, or with a brush. I think the only drawback with this one is, again, its price, although I don't think $20 is super expensive, because there are a lot of foundations I will be mentioning from the drugstore that retail closer to $15, and this one does perform like a high-end foundation, so I think at $20 it's actually not too bad of a price. Coming in at number 5 is the Physicians Formula Healthy Foundation. I would say this is a solid medium coverage foundation. This one retails for around $12 to $14 at the drugstore. This one does have a satin, very skin-like finish. I like the finish of this one. I like the wear time of this one. I do find that this one settles into my lines a little bit more than some of my other foundations. I don't know why that is. I've tried setting it and it just seems to settle a little bit more just into my actual lines, not in like the areas around my nose, but my actual smile lines and my forehead lines. All of my foundations settle a little bit into my lines, but for some reason I notice it a little bit more with this one. The look of this bottle is beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful bottles that I have. I mean, this looks like it could be a Lancome foundation. It's just stunning, stunning packaging, but I really don't personally love the doe foot on this. I just find, not even necessarily that I mind the doe foot very much, but I find that when I have to apply this on my face, I just wish that I could get enough product on the doe foot to just swipe my face like once or twice, but I find I have to keep re-dipping into this, and for some reason that just kind of bothers me a little bit. But I do think it's a really nice lightweight foundation. I think the only drawbacks again are the doe foot. Some people would say the smell. I actually really like the smell of this foundation. It smells really yummy to me. I've heard some people say I think that this one smells a little bit like paint to them. And maybe that's why, because I actually like the smell of paint. But I think the only other drawback on this one is the shade range. They don't have a massive shade range. If you buy it online, Physicians Formula carries 16 shades total, but I don't think that's an incredible shade range. So there's a good chance that it might be a little bit difficult to find a good match. But I do really like this foundation, despite some of its drawbacks. It's one of the ones that I wear probably the most often, which is why I ranked it at number 5. But it is a really lovely foundation if you're looking for something really nice, satin finished, solid medium coverage from the drugstore. This is a great one. Coming in at number 4 is probably one of my most repurchased foundations ever, and is the Milani 2-in-1 Conceal and Perfect Foundation. I love this foundation. This is a good full coverage foundation, but it doesn't feel heavy or thick on my skin. Now, that said, this is a thicker foundation formula. When I pump this out on my hands, it feels very rich and thick, but once I blend it into my skin, I don't think it feels heavy on my skin. It feels like kind of a luxurious hydrating moisturizer for me. It has really good wear time, and this one has a good natural, leaning a little bit more dewy finish on me. I've heard a few people mention that they thought this was a matte finish. I definitely don't find this to be a matte finish on my skin. I'm not sure why that is. I wouldn't say it's dewy or luminous per se, but I do think it's really hydrating. This is also a great mixer foundation. I love mixing this one into foundations that maybe have a little bit more of a light coverage. This gives them a little bit more beefy of a coverage. It's also super affordable. You can find this for under $10 if you buy it at Target or at Walmart. A few things I think could be a drawback are the fact that it's thick. I know there are some people that does bother them a little bit, or it feels a little too heavy on their skin. Even though I don't personally feel that way, I know some people have said that. Also, their shade range. In most stores that I bought this in, the shade range in store is not usually very fantastic. They usually only have about maybe 10 shades in store. However, if you do look online, they do have 45 shades of this on Milani's website, so check there if you're not finding your shade in the store. But yeah, I've repurchased this several times in several different shades. It's one of the foundations I reach for the very, very most, and I'll continue to repurchase this one because I just think it looks really great on my skin. It wears really well, it doesn't break apart, it's not too drying, but it's also not too dewy or greasy to where it doesn't last on me. It's just a really good kind of all-purpose foundation when I want more of a full coverage. So coming in at number 3 is this right here. This is the L'Oreal Infallible Fresh Wear Foundation. This is a great foundation. This is one of my newer foundations that I'm recommending today, but I fell pretty quickly in love with this foundation. This one I'd say has a solid medium coverage, but it can be built up to a full coverage. It retails for close to $15 at Walmart and Target, which is a little bit more expensive than I typically like to spend on a drugstore foundation. This one does have a solid satin kind of natural skin-like finish. It's very buildable. It's a flexible foundation, as in if you want this to be light coverage, it can be more of a light coverage, but if you want it to be full coverage, you can easily build it up to a full coverage. They also have a very good shade range. I would say one of the things I like the most about this foundation is this foundation, not just is it long wearing, but it does not change in the way that it looks throughout the day. It will look as good on me after 10 hours of wear as it did at the very beginning of the day. It never looks greasy, but it also doesn't get drying on me as long as I prep my skin well. And that brings me into probably the only possible drawback with this foundation. It is one that I have to be a little more careful with how I prepare my skin. I have to make sure I use a little bit extra moisturizer or a hydrating primer with this one, or it can be a little bit drying on my dry skin. But as long as I moisturize or use a great primer, this is just like a perfect foundation for me. It just looks really good on my skin all day long. When I don't want a dewy finish, this is the one that I will reach for 9 times out of 10. And coming in at number 2 is my kind of old holy grail. It is the IT Cosmetics CC Cream Illumination. I love this stuff. I have been repurchasing this and using it for years. It's my favorite high-end foundation. I absolutely love this. This one is a medium to full coverage. It retails for $39 on Ulta or Sephora's website. I love the way this foundation looks on my skin. This is a foundation that I prefer to apply with my fingers. It's one that when it goes on, it feels like I'm putting a moisturizer on. I can just quickly spread this all over my face in about 6 seconds. It just looks incredible. It just makes me look like I'm glowing in the very best way. It also applies well with a brush or a sponge if that's your preferred method, or if you don't like using your fingers, you definitely don't have to. If you haven't tried any of the IT Cosmetics CC creams out, I recommend going to a Sephora or an Ulta. See how this one looks different than the original CC cream and see if you think it's something you would like. A couple more benefits of this one. It does have SPF 50. It says on here it has an anti-aging hydrating serum. I will agree with the hydrating part. This is definitely a very hydrating foundation. If you have very, very dry skin, I recommend giving this one a try because it truly feels like you're putting on a really nice skin cream. It does come in a tube with a pump, which is kind of my ideal packaging, especially for traveling. But one thing that I want to mention with the packaging that I've just started to notice is as this gets a little bit older, you can see this kind of shiny finish on the outside starts to deteriorate a little bit, and sometimes I find little tiny flecks of this kind of almost ends up being like a glitter that end up in my foundation because this is one that I so often apply with my fingers. So just be aware of that. As it wears out a little bit, you might also find the same thing happening. Maybe be a little bit more careful with how you handle it. There are a couple of drawbacks to this one. First off, the price. This is a higher end foundation. It's $39. It's not one that I use every single day because I typically like to reserve my more high-end foundations for somewhat special occasions like date nights or lunch dates, or that's basically it. That's as exciting as my life gets. Another thing some people might consider to be a drawback on this one is the ingredient list. So I have a backup of this foundation sitting right here in an unopened box. I started reading through the ingredients in here, and after about 1 minute I decided, no way, I'm not going to go into all these ingredients. So the ingredient list starts right here, goes all the way down, and then starts back over on this side and goes all the way to the bottom. So there are a lot of ingredients in here. I've heard people say that's usually not a good thing. It's usually better to pick skincare that has fewer ingredients in it. So that's something just to be aware of. But I haven't had any adverse issues with this. It works really well for my skin. I like how it wears on my skin. I like how it looks on my skin all day long. It's just one of my favorite foundations. I absolutely love this stuff. And moving on to my number one ranked foundation, I have to give it to the Flower Beauty Light Illusion Foundation. You guys know that I love this foundation. I just got done talking about this one in my favorites video for the month of August, and I think that was the third appearance that this has made in a favorites video over the last year or so. It is just beautiful. I love how this looks and feels on my skin. This one is a solid medium coverage. It does retail for about $15 at the drugstore. And I want to say this, as I was doing some research on this in preparation for this video, I am terrified that they are discontinuing this. I talked recently about the fact that my Walmart has kind of kicked Flower Beauty out of the store. I've heard a lot of people mention that your Walmarts are doing the same thing. I've heard some people say that their Targets have done that, or their Ultas have started doing this, and even online at Ulta's website, a lot of these shades are sold out. I have a gut feeling that either Flower Beauty is completely revamping things, or they may be going out of business or something, which terrifies me. Again, I probably shouldn't say that because I'm just speculating, but I just have this sinking feeling that this foundation is going to disappear. If you see it in your drugstore, if you like a hydrating, luminous finish to your foundation, pick this thing up, you guys. It is absolutely amazing. I love this stuff. I already mentioned it does have a beautiful luminous finish. It doesn't have the physical glow that this one has. I mean, this literally has some sort of luminosity to it. This one just has like a glossy, glassy, glowy look. It doesn't have any sort of glitter or reflectiveness to it, but it's just so hydrating on the skin. I absolutely love this. This does come in a beautiful glass bottle with a pump. It's such great packaging. And considering the fact that this is so hydrating, it actually has pretty good wear time for me. Sometimes I do like to mix this with the Sephora 10-hour wear or the Infallible Fresh Wear or the Maybelline Superstay. I do have this one on my skin today mixed with the Catrice HD Liquid Coverage Foundation. I've never tried this mix before, and I love how it looks on the skin. It's really beautiful. I just can't recommend this one enough. The only cons I would say with this foundation are, first off, the price. Again, $15 I think is a little expensive for a drugstore foundation, although that seems to be kind of the trend. Most drugstore foundations these days seem to be going for closer to $15. Also, the accessibility. I'm telling you guys, I think that they might be discontinuing this stuff. So if you've been meaning to get your hands on this, I would recommend doing it sooner than later. And the last thing is the shade range. This doesn't have the greatest shade range in the world. They only have 12 shades of this online, which I don't think is amazing, and it looks to me like the darkest shade is probably not super dark, so that might be an issue for some of you. Let me know if you guys have tried this one out. I think for those of you that maybe have more normal to oily skin, or if you don't like very dewy finishes, you probably would not like this one because it is quite hydrating, but I just think this is beautiful on my drier, slightly more mature skin. Alright you guys, and that is it for my top 10 foundations ranked. I hope that this video was helpful for you guys. Please let me know if you have tried out any of these foundations, how they worked for you. Also, let me know if you guys have any foundation recommendations that you think I might like based on the ones that I have tried. Thank you guys so much for stopping by today. I hope that you guys enjoyed this one. Hopefully it was helpful for you guys. If you are new here, I hope that you'll stick around, hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, And that is it for today. Hope you guys have a great day, and I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye. Super Steve. Did I just say Super Steve? The Sephora 10-hour perfection. No, 10-hour wear. Oh my gosh. Some of these names are so long. So I thought a fun thumbnail would be to like drop the foundation on my face. That'd be cute, but it could also be disastrous. Why don't we try something else first, just in case that doesn't work out.